All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome back. It has been a few months, and of course, this is the cycle. We know it. I get inspired. I do podcasts about things that I've been thinking about. I get really excited, and then something happens. I'm like, okay, I gotta take a second. Got to take a couple weeks off. Think about some more topics, maybe, and then somehow I don't know how 4 or 5 months go by. I don't know how that happens. I really don't. Um, I think I uploaded a couple months ago, but it was just this one-off podcast. We'll see. I got something to say, so I like perfect. I got something to say, so I'm gonna make a podcast about it. Um, Masculinity. I have been thinking a lot about masculinity over the last couple of months. I've been learning a lot, been focusing in on it, and wanted to do a podcast today on masculinity. From the perspective of a 22-year-old, I have to put that little asterisk in there because I understand that there's a lot of lessons about being a man that I have yet to learn, and a lot of those lessons I will not learn for, excuse me, for probably a couple more decades. And so this is just masculinity as far as I can tell from a 22-year-old's perspective who has done a fair amount of reading of his Bible over the last few years, um, reading other sources, listening to podcasts, listening to folks who are very respectable men talk about masculinity and what that vision looks like. And so I just have some things to say in light of a poem that I wrote. So first, before I get into this poem, I want to give a shout out to a Substack that I started. Might have mentioned this in the last podcast. Not sure if I did, but in case you missed it, I started a Substack. You could find that at I believe it's trevormauk.substack.com. I'll try to put a link to it in the description. I've published a couple articles in there, posted rather, I don't know if it's published, but posted a couple articles. First one is a very serious article, something I spent a couple months on. It's a long article, and the aim is to figure out why our society is producing someone like a mass killer, a mass shooter, right? Why is it? It's not that they're here and what do we do about it? It's why are we producing it in the first place? And if we can find the why, maybe we could find some sort of solution. And I shared some ideas on that. And of course, it's a big, allow me to go on a tangent here. It's a big responsibility to go and say this is the root cause in society, right? And it's like that's a pretty bold statement to make, especially for a young person. But I think I think really if there's anything good, if there's anything true in what I've had to say, I attribute it to great thinkers who have come before me, and I attribute it to the grace of God giving me any wisdom to apply to this topic. So I hope you go check it out. Let me know what you think. I also posted a commentary on one of Post Malone's most recent songs, Love Hate Letter to Alcohol. It's a great song on wrestling with addiction and why is it that we keep going back to these vices that have us in their grips, and how do we feel about that, and then I use that as a springboard to say, well, is there something beyond these vices? Is there something that can are these are what we are looking for in these vices can actually be completely fulfilled in something higher? Spoiler alert, yes, there is. So I do encourage you to go check that out. Let me know what you think. Another really cool thing is I have been getting into poetry. Lately, I've been writing poems. So far, I've only posted one poem on my Substack, and then I have them posted on my Instagram. I definitely encourage you to check them out on Instagram because there is a visual aspect of these poems as well, and I'll get into that later. And I think we could definitely use a revival of poetry. Poetry is not something for effeminate men. Far from that. I think one of the most masculine men in the Bible, who was not Jesus, King David, he wrote the Psalms, and it's the most beautiful poetry ever. And it's both prayers and poetry, and it's absolutely beautiful. And anyone who questions the masculinity of David, I think is I don't know, flirting with heresy to to be generous with that. But also, you have one of the most prominent men as far as material wealth in the Bible, King Solomon, right, the son of David. He's one of the richest men in the world, and he wrote one of the most beautiful love poems in the Bible, Song of Songs, Song of Solomon, as it's referred to as well. So and then, you just look in the last couple of centuries, right, just very, very masculine men who write very great poetry, Walt Whitman, T.S. Eliot, Wordsworth, Robert Burns out of Scotland, yeah, and Shakespeare. I mean, he was a primarily a playwright, but he wrote fantastic poetry, and his plays. There's a saying. I think it's more amongst older folks, not so much now, but it's like anything you need to know about humanity that isn't found in the Bible can be found in Shakespeare, and that's pretty much all you need. So definitely get it out of your head that poetry is for effeminate men. It's definitely a very masculine thing to do, and poetry is I would say a beautified version of presenting ideas. Right? We are very, I think now in this modern world where we're so focused on function, only function, right? So it can be these very dull articles, very dull presentations of ideas, lectures, right? All of those things are necessary, and we need all those things, and I've learned a great deal from those things, but we also do need beauty in life, because beauty, ultimately, it's a harmonization of all of the parts, right? The harmonization of multiple parts into one goal, and it just adds a richness to life. It brings inspiration, joy, and frankly some magic to it. And so, if we can communicate ideas, we can also communicate them. If they're true, we can communicate them in a beautiful way. And I think poetry is the way to do that. And so, ideas that are communicated, good ideas that are communicated in a beautiful way, I think have only more impact, right? I have a poem that I'm going to be giving a commentary. This is going to be the main focus of this podcast, that is on masculinity. Now, I could write a treatise, I could write an essay, an article on masculinity. In fact, I was about to write, this was going to be, before I had written this poem, I was figuring out how do I write an article based off masculinity and all of these things that I've been learning. And then I was like, you know what, I'm going to write a poem about it, because I just think it's cooler, and hopefully it has much more punch to it. But before we get into it, definitely give me a follow on Instagram for the not just the poems, but the visual presentation of these poems, because I think it's very powerful to have. Right, of course, the poem is a beautiful communication of ideas, and then a beautiful communication of those poems is the visual. And so I definitely think it's great to have the visual presentation of the poem reflect the idea of the poem. So, for example, these masculine poems I have in a couple different calligraphy style fonts that I've been working on, trying to get better at. Old English font. There's a font called Blackletter, which is simply like a simplified version of Old English. And then poems. We love poems about all sorts of different things. Poems can be about just about anything, but we all love poems. So I do have some of those, and I really like the very nice cursive that you can do, somewhat calligraphy style. I'm not super fancy like wedding invitations or something, not yet anyways. Maybe I'll get there, but I do have some of that. So definitely give me a follow on Instagram, tmock_56. And then make sure you give a follow on Substack. You can sign up every time I post an article or a poem. It'll send you an email, let you know, and you can check it out that way. So let's get into it. I think that's a good intro. Let's get into it. So I'm going to be sharing this poem that I wrote called Man is a Mountain. Now, I got the idea from a podcast that I was listening to, actually an interview with Shia LaBeouf. Now, Shia LaBeouf has come out doing two very big interviews, one of them with Bishop Robert Barron, and then another one with his good actor friend John Bernthal, where he recounts his story of scandal about his life, mistakes that he's made, wrongs that he's done towards folks, coming to the light, the shame that came with that, the rock bottom that he hit, literally to the point of being suicidal, and he's very open about that, and then how taking on the role of a very significant Christian figure, very powerful, strong Christian man, portraying him in a film, how taking that on called him into something bigger, and that being Christianity. And I mean, you might have a different opinion about it, but listening to both of those interviews, Shia LaBeouf definitely sounds like a man who has been truly redeemed by Christ, and I'm absolutely happy for him. I'm so thrilled about it, and I'm rejoicing for him. I'm praying for him, as I would invite you to do. These new converts, especially in the public eye, are so prone to attack by the enemy and by the world. So please pray for Shia LaBeouf. He's a very talented actor. I've been a fan of his for such a long time. I almost grew up with his work, right, going back to Even Stevens and Holes, and just all the work he's done has been fantastic. And anyways, I bring up those interviews because he mentions in one of them with his friend John Bernthal, and he might have mentioned it with Bishop Robert Barron too, but he's talking during his journey up from rock bottom into Christianity, studying for this role of this very powerful Christian figure, Padre Pio. He's at a monastery, and I'm not sure how the whole ranking thing works, a hierarchy at a monastery, if there is one, but I would say probably he describes him as a much more experienced member, someone who's been in there a long time, someone who has earned a lot of respect amongst the brothers there. He might be the head of the order, I don't know, but he was talking with Shia LaBeouf, and he was talking about masculinity, right? And he talks about how he brings up this metaphor, a mountain is very masculine, right? And then so he shares this with John Bernthal in the interview, and they go over this really beautiful metaphor of the stability of a mountain, right? The simplicity yet complexity of a mountain, and the stillness, the confidence, and the strength, right? That the image of a mountain gives off, and how that's a great metaphor for a man. And I thought it was a beautiful metaphor, and I thought it was something that I kind of took inspiration from, and I wanted to delve into that idea and bring more truth from that metaphor. And so I wrote a poem on it. It's called Man is a Mountain. Very creative, right, after that idea. So man is a mountain, and I'm going to go ahead and read it right here. Just if you're watching the video, you could see it in Old English. If you want to read it in its entirety, of course, you can just pause it right here and then read that. I'll try to bring it a little bit closer for you. There you go. Pause it right there. Okay. Or you could go check it out on Instagram. So I will read it here, and then I think the remainder of this podcast, I would just like to explore the ideas that I tried to touch on in this poem, stanza by stanza. All right. Let me get a sip of water, and we'll get into it. Man is a mountain. The storms rage. The mountain is still. Refuge is in its caves. Protection is its will. Only the mightiest mountains guard the fairest princesses. Only the strongest mountains have minds of the deepest riches. At a distance, the mountain is simple. Up close shows its magnificence. life, rocks, cliffs, streams, a complex marvel. A great mountain, conquerable. A great range of mountains, impenetrable. The highest mountain is content. Surrounding mountains give it deference. Stories told of it are ancient. In a journey, it's looked to for reference. Mountains are where heaven and earth meet, and the path to the Creator is made. While the glory of God shines on the greatest peaks, here the cosmic drama is displayed. Man is a mountain. All right. Hope you enjoyed that. Now let's dive in. Okay, so first, before we get in to the words themselves, let's talk about the visual presentation. Again, Old English font. I think Old English is a very masculine font, and I want, again, poetry is a beautiful presentation, is a beautiful communication of ideas. The visual can be a beautiful presentation of the poem, right? So it's a kind of a layered approach here with communicating masculinity. And I believe, and it's something that I think we've lost in this society, that the visual is just as important as the internal, right? So what you see on the outside actually communicates what's on the inside. And I think this can be applied in all sorts of all sorts of different contexts, whether it's dress, right? How do we dress? Whether it's building furniture, whether it's building architecture, right? Something like this, where, especially in this modern world, we have become so engrossed in this idea of form following function, as I believe the line is said. Form follows function. So that is to say, everything is based off of function. Does it work? Is it necessary? Does it serve X purpose of doing something? Right? So, for example, it's hot outside. I'm just going to wear shorts, t-shirt, and flip-flops, right? Function. Wearing as much clothes as I can while maintaining comfort and coolness, right? Same opposite can be said for the winter, right? And then even and let's take for example architecture. We just need a building. We need shelter so we can conduct work in it or have a space in it. The building doesn't need to look that beautiful. We just need a ceiling. We need 4 walls, or right. It can be very square, very angled, and we don't need that much. There's that school of thought. However, I believe it's very dull, and I think that no matter how much we try, we can't get away from the fact that the visual does communicate the external does communicate what's internal. So take for example, right, these beautiful cathedrals in Europe, right? And there's a few very beautiful cathedrals in the United States. Are these stained glass windows, intricate pillars and carvings and complex, especially like the Gothic cathedrals, the complex buttresses, if you will, the arcs, are they necessary? We need a building to go into as a group of believers to worship God. Okay, so at the most basic, we just need 4 walls and a ceiling. So why have all this complexity? And it's because it communicates something. We are putting so much effort into building this place where we are going to worship the God of the universe, right? And you get that immediately. You don't have to think about it. You just look at it. Look at the Notre Dame Cathedral. Fortunately, it's burned down. or some of it's burned down. Look at the Notre Dame Cathedral. What does that communicate? Does that I believe that communicates people who are very serious about worshiping and glorifying and giving reverence to the God of the universe, right? It communicates that just by looking at it, I think. So let's take clothing, right? How do you want to communicate yourself? How do you want people to receive you? What do you want to communicate about yourself? Is your dress reflecting that? So, for example, I'm doing and this might be a poor attempt on my part, but I'm doing a podcast on masculinity. I thought, how interesting, I'll just wear a Carhartt shirt, right? Now, I could have just thrown on any old shirt. It would have done the trick. But I think right now, in our culture today, there's a connotation of masculinity in Carhartt, right? Because hardworking men wear Carhartt a lot, right? And we associate a hardworking man with a masculine man. We associate those things, right? So maybe I'm not particularly that type of man, but again, it's an attempt, maybe a poor one at that, to communicate masculinity, right? Look at men of very high status and those who gain respect. I think the ones who can easily gain respect are the ones who you can see it right away. They don't even have to say a word. It's how are they presented, right? How do they visually present themselves? And unfortunately, on the one hand, well, okay, hold on. I was going to go off in a tangent, but I don't need to. Anyways, so there's definitely a lot of intention behind the visual of this poem, right? I didn't want to just have it written down in my journal and then take a picture of that, or just post a screenshot of the text in my notes. It would have communicated the same idea, right? The same idea communicated in the poem, but I want to, number one, I think masculinity is a very important thing, and good masculinity is something all men need to aim towards. So how do I communicate importance? I put a lot of time and effort into writing it, right? And into the presentation. Okay, hey, he put a lot of effort into it. He takes this idea seriously, right? You want people to take you seriously. If you're dressed like a child who's just grown up, you're going to have a harder time you're not going to start off on the right foot when they first meet you. Okay? All right. Now, the first stanza. Okay. The storms rage, the mountain is still. Refuge is in its caves. Protection is its will. So I wrote this stanza with this image in my head of like a time lapse of a mountain or a mountain range and a storm going over the mountain, right? And there's something that's so visually appealing to it. On the one hand, it sounds kind of dumb. It's like, okay, it's a mountain. Obviously, it's just going to sit there. But there's something that we kind of get, and I think the reason why those time-lapse videos are really kind of inspiring is because we see a sort of, as you might want to call it, a sort of metaphor, a sort of narrative structure in there, as we know that storms are a force of chaos. And so it's really a visually appealing thing, an awe-inspiring thing to see such a force of chaos come up against such a force of order, right? And it's this really cool thing to see a mountain just sit there, and it's like, yeah, bring it on. What are you going to do? You're going to move me? Yeah, good luck. I'm going to sit here still and throw everything you got at me. So likewise, I think a very good man, a very masculine man, is someone who can take on the storms of life and be still, right? I think probably one of the most attractive qualities of a man is stability. And I don't mean attractive in the romantic sense, though it can include that, but attractive in the more broader sense it's attractive to, yes, women, to a man who can be stable in the midst of the storms, but it's incredibly attractive to children, to friends, to people that the man oversees, whether it might be in a company, whether it might be, in just some organization, any sort of position of leadership, or opportunity for a man to be looked to for guidance. Seeing that man being a source of stability, it's number one, it's very comforting, right? It's like, I'm scared, I don't know what to do, but this guy, he is calm. He's calm. And so it brings comfort, because there's something in you that says it's going to be all right. And why is it important to have that stability in the midst of the storm? It's because when you're calm, when you have that stillness, you're not emotional. You're not prone to the whims of emotion. Now, emotion certainly has its place. There are times where it's very appropriate to be very keen and aware of your emotions, and to figure out why you're having certain emotions and see where that leads you. But emotions have much more sway. They are much more chaotic. They can take you places that you don't intend. They can make you act out in ways that you don't want to. They can make you utter words that you might regret, right? Ultimately, emotion can be, if fed, a severe force of chaos. And to withstand chaos, you cannot fight chaos with chaos. This is just a fact of life. Chaos needs to be met with order if chaos is going to be overcome. So when you are not succumbed to your emotions, you're calm. And when you're calm, you're a thinking man. And a thinking man is an effective man, because he can problem solve much more easily. He can help those around him. He can take the knowledge and apply it to the situation, aka wisdom. And because of this, comfort and calmness spreads, and then it's also inspiring. So I think it's very easy to think of a man who can take on the storms of life and rally behind that, right? And it's a good thing. And it's a good thing to look to men who are very masculine and take inspiration from them. So I think of like really interesting historical figures like George Washington, right? I think of that famous painting of him crossing the Delaware. Now, I hope I have my history right on this, which you have my full permission to roast me on, because I did study U.S. history in college. So if I get this wrong, you have my permission to roast me on it. But if I remember correctly, right, it's the colonials, the Americans rather, they're kind of on their heels, and the war is looking bleak. And the revolutionaries, they get an opportunity where I believe it's during Christmas, and the only time that they could actually get an advantage over the British is, by taking them by surprise. So it's in the middle of the night, early in the morning. They cross a freezing cold Delaware. It's in the winter, and then we have this visual, this iconic painting of George Washington standing on the boat in a sea of boats, a river of boats rather, of his men crossing the Delaware, and he has this very stoic and heroic look on his face. He is an absolute mountain looking at the storm, and he's saying, bring it on, right? And so men were able to rally behind that and be inspired by that, and it turned the tide of the war. Another great example would be President Lincoln and General Ulysses S. Grant, who eventually became President Grant. But in the midst of the Civil War, one of the worst wars in the United States history, the fate of the Civil War really came down to like one or two battles. The Confederacy almost won, and believe it or not. They got very far north, and there were a couple battles that turned the tide of that. I apologize that I don't have the names on me right now, but right, General Grant spearheads the military, turns the tide of the war, turns the Confederates back on their heels, and they ultimately win. The whole time, President Lincoln is the mastermind behind the plan. He's trying his best to keep the Union a Union, right? He doesn't. It breaks his heart to see the Union break apart, and he's doing everything he can in his power to work with the government, right? I definitely recommend the movie on Lincoln that Daniel Day-Lewis did, portraying Lincoln. Really shows the great political scene going on during the whole Civil War, and he's just an absolute mountain during that, right? A huge storm, and President Lincoln, General Grant, absolute mountains, and they win, and the United States became a better place because of that victory of the Union. Another great example, I think, is Churchill rallying Great Britain against the Nazis. Right, Great Britain was looking pretty rough, and the Nazis were looking pretty tough, and definitely recommend the Gary Oldman portrayal of Churchill, the film he did a few years back. What an absolute mountain of a man, right? Said, "Storm, bring it on," and he rallies his country. And of course, I wouldn't be a true American if I didn't mention that the Americans came in and helped. But no, I mean it was utterly consequential what he did, and had he not been there, it could have been a very different picture for Great Britain. So the picture is stillness, stability in the midst of chaos, in the midst of the storms of life, and that will inspire those around you, right? Focus on cultivating calmness and competence, right? When you're calm in the midst of the storm, you could think, and when you could think, you can do, and you can do effectively, and that effectiveness in your action means competence, and competence means problem solving and taking care of business, if you will, right? Have that confidence, have that courage, and it's so important. Have the courage in the little things. If you can't have courage in the little things, you won't have courage in the big things. So there's that stanza. Let's move on to the next one. Only the mightiest mountains guard the fairest princesses. Only the strongest mountains have mines of the deepest riches. So these are kind of more inspired from like fairy tales, if you will, where like these stories of these, the fairest princess is in, right, this big mountain. She's always on a mountain. She's always in a mountain, in a castle on a mountain or something like that, right? And it's not some little hill, that she's on. It's always like, whoa, that's a majestic mountain and a majestic castle on that mountain. And there's this beautiful, as the fairy tales would say, very fair princess. And that's where you're going to find the fairest princesses. So I think that metaphor is very powerful in real life, right? Like it's the best women are going to end up with the best man, right? And so the way that we can apply that is ultimately, if we want to be the kind of mountain that a woman is going to set her life up on, right? Take her place of refuge. We gotta be mighty, right? We gotta be, and that's all encompassing, right? We gotta have that stability. And so, Jordan Peterson talks about this. I think it's such a brilliant point. But don't think of how can I find the one for me? He's like, I hate that question, right? He says, rather, you should really think about it as, think about the kind of woman that you want to be with, and then strive to be a man worthy of that kind of woman, right? And so odds are that you don't want to be with a woman who's sleeping around, who has caustic language, who's erratic, who is not nurturing. You want to be with a woman who supports you, supports your ambition. By the way, ladies, that's a great trait to have. Supporting your man's ambition is big. A woman who will respect you, right? A woman who will, right, recognize you as the head of the household, right? We're not with this whole modern thing, right? If we understand that Christ has instituted the household for the men to be the head of the house. Of course, that modern people interpret that to be a whole can of worms, and we're not going to get into that. But right, I imagine, guys, right, you want to be with a woman who's like that, right? Who has all those qualities. Look at yourself right now. Would that kind of woman want to be with you? I don't know where I'm at. I'm like, I don't know. I got a lot of things I still got to work on. So a woman who's going to be attracted, or that kind of woman, she's not going to be attracted to someone who doesn't have his act together, right? Someone who's not, right, that stable mountain, that stable force, that source of order in the midst of the chaos, right? Someone who's not competent, someone who's not confident, right? She's not going to be attracted to that. So work to be the kind of man that is worthy for the kind of woman that you aspire to be with. And don't be afraid to aspire to be with a good woman. Don't settle, right? I mean, you do, as a man, you do deserve someone to love you, to be with you, to appreciate you, and to respect you. So don't settle. And Jordan Peterson says this. I hope he's right, and I'm still waiting on it. If you become that man, those women will find you. That's what he says. So hopefully I'll report back to you sooner rather than later on that one. But I think it's true, right? I mean, look at the men in your life that you really respect, and look at the women who are with them, right? There's a correlation there, right? You probably think very highly of the women that they're with if you really respect this man, and if he's a great man. So follow in their footsteps. Okay. Now this line of only the strongest mountains have mines of the deepest riches. So it should be obvious, but in case it's not, I do not mean material wealth. I think, in fact, I know that an incredibly masculine man does not need to be materially wealthy. There can be overlap there because a very masculine man is a very competent man, and someone who applies his competence in a very tactful way can ultimately do very well for himself. It just naturally flows, right? But it goes very deep, right? So it's these very large mountains can have very very deep mines in them, right? And when and these mines can have very big riches. Like I think of excuse me, the Calico Mountains out by where in the Mojave Desert, right? A lot of silver in there, and or at least there was, and in the particular spot, it's one of the larger mountains in its area. There's a lot of mountains there in the desert, but it's one of the larger ones, and I got a cool opportunity to explore a lot of the mines in there, and there's a whole network of mines in there. And so it's only a very strong mountain that can sustain that sort of mining and those sorts of caves and not crash and burn, right? If you try to dig a mine in a puny little hill, be careful. It might come crashing down. So if you want to have a rich and fulfilled life, you got to have some strength. You got to have some grit. And you develop strength by taking on challenges, by taking on responsibility, of course. and you're going to fail, and learning from those failures, learning from those mistakes strengthens you, and from that strength, you again, like the stability of a mountain, it inspires those around, right? The stability of a man in the midst of a storm, it inspires those around. And when you have that strength, inspiring those around, of course, love is going to come in. You're going to be able to facilitate and set up a sort of kingdom for yourself. I use that term very loosely, but just people who are in your lives that are just beautiful, wonderful people, and help you live a rich life full of love and joy and laughter and adventure, right? So there's that. So strengthen every aspect of masculinity that you can. All right. Stanza 3. At a distance, the mountain is simple. Up close shows its magnificence. Life, rocks, cliffs, streams, a complex marvel. Now, this stanza could really be applied very generally. It doesn't necessarily have to be applied to men. But it's a very simple, well, I shouldn't say simple. It's a little bit of a more elegant way of saying, don't judge a book by its cover, right? So, right, at a distance, the mountain is simple. So as a man, I don't think, on the one hand, we need to communicate what we want to. Do we want to be respected? Do we want to be welcomed? Do we want to be appreciated? Do we want to be liked, but not in the sense of like this, self-conscious need to be liked? Rather, do we want to have a good impact on people? Visually, we have to communicate that, right? And whether that's how we dress, how we just interact with people very simply, right? Simple interactions and simple conversations, small talk, things like that. How we conduct ourselves is very important. So at the same time, we should not be seeking undue attention, right? Making sure that how we present ourselves is appropriate. So let's see. And I think the cool thing with this metaphor is that there's not one way for a mountain to look, right? There's an infinite ways that a mountain can look, right? And so communicate that simplicity. I think their simplicity and masculinity can go hand in hand very well, and yet even though there's a simplicity of a mountain from the distance, there's really an infinite way that it could look. So exercise wisdom and discernment in how you're presenting yourself in the appropriate manners, how you're conducting yourself around folks, and make sure that there is a overall communicating what you expect to receive from people and what you want to give to people. And that being said, I think if people don't know you and they can look at you and say, wow, it looks like a simple chap, there's kind of a simplicity to him. I think that's a good thing, because how should I say this? Trying to figure it out. If you're communicating chaos and seeking undue attention, then that does not communicate stability at all. It doesn't communicate competence and confidence, right? It doesn't communicate that sort of thing. And so so be simple, and you don't want to give more. You don't want to give more than you need to, right? So let me just use an example. I think an example would be better to communicate what I'm trying to say. It's interesting when people feel the need to dress up in very like gothic clothing, very animated dress, things like that, right? Like I mean there's an element where they think that it's very rebellious, and it's like right? Like it's very cool, but at the end of the day, it's a very loud grabbing of attention, right? It sticks out. It's very it's a loud visual, if you will, if that makes sense. And there's a sort of insecurity. Like I remember watching this video of the street preacher who had encountered a fella who was very gothic in his dress, and he wanted to seem like kind of like an edgy atheist a little bit, had like that sort of depressed, that depressed presentation about him. And when they really get into a conversation about it, we find out that he becomes very open, and his words start to communicate that he desires stability, and he desires love and acceptance and respect and things like that. And he feels very self-conscious and very insecure, and so and he feels neglected, right? And so there's an outward expression of that, and it comes out very loudly. And after that encounter, the street preacher had the camera aside, and he said, be on the lookout. Those are the kind of people that we seem to be most scared of when we want to share the good news with people. But at the end of the day, they're usually the folks who are most in need, as far as the most hungry for it, for the truth, for the gospel. So now, if you have those feelings, then you need to deal with them, and you need to seek people who can help you. Now, here is the error in displaying that to just everyone. When you display that to everyone, you're not going to get help. Rather, I would say communicate yourself very simply, right? And whether that's stress, whether that's conducting, and I don't mean be dull. I just mean don't seek undue attention, but rather those insecurities that might prompt you to dress in these certain like loud ways, if you will. No, not just anybody's going to help you out with that. It's going to be the people who are very close to you. And that's what I'm trying to communicate in this thing is that the closer someone gets to you, the more complex they should discover. The more complex you are. How do I say that? The more complex you become to them as they get to know you more, right? There's layers to you, so you're able to conduct yourself in a simple way. But then when you have close friends, when you have an intimate partner, when you have a family, right, you are able to be somewhat sophisticated, right? You're intelligent, you're learning, you're reading, you're listening to people who know more than you. You're trying to implement lessons that you're learning from folks. Right? You take on challenges, and with those challenges come lessons and adventures, and you get to share all those things. And so the more that people learn from you, or the more that people get to know you, the more those people can learn from you and learn about you. And it goes the other way. The deeper that people know you, the more, or the better they're able to help you with those struggles. If you put those struggles that are really deep down, right, those things of insecurity and depression, right, these are very serious things. I'm not saying you should ignore them. I'm just saying if you're bringing such deep pains and wounds out to the open in an openly expressive way, and I'm not just talking about how you dress. I'm talking about how you just speak to anybody, right? If you're like that and you're presenting yourself like that, you're not going to get any help. People who don't know you very, very well are not going to be able to help you, but the people who know you very well, they are going to be able to help you in those wounds, right? People who are very close, and in that closeness, the closeness breeds care, it breeds concern, and it inspires love, right? So don't seek healing and help from just anybody, right? You seek those things from people that are very close to you. So have some complexity about yourself, have some sophistication, but you don't need to go around spouting it off like some prideful person, right? You don't need to be opening your mouth about how much you know and how interesting of a person you are. Just keep it in between the lines, keep it moving. And as people get to know you more, share more of who you are with them. Because if you overshare, this is something that I've learned. If you overshare with people who are not at a, if you overshare beyond the relationship that you are, the depth of relationship that you're at with that person, there can be some very serious hurt there. And I think we all know this, right? So I think on the surface, right, from a distance, we should err on the side of simplicity. Okay, I think I've belabored that point enough. Let's get on to the next stanza. A great mountain, conquerable. A great range of mountains, impenetrable. All right, so even the greatest men can fall. This is something that I think if you believe that this perfect idea of masculinity, this ideal that we should all strive for, if you believe that you can get super close to it and attain it, that you're set and you can take on anything, that means you still have a lot more room to grow, more than you probably realize. Great men can fall. Even the greatest mountains, Mount Everest, can be conquered, right? People can still conquer those mountains. And so for this metaphor, even the greatest men can fall, and that could be whether it's from external forces. Sometimes the world is just too heavy to bear, even for the greatest men by themselves, right? And sometimes those great men can slip, right? We're all sinful, we're all fallen, and even the holiest of men can fall, and so that is good to keep that in mind, because we do want to look to great men for inspiration and a source of strength, but we don't want to look to them as the highest, as our ideal, because you can't place your ideal in one man, right? In one human being. You can't place your ideal in that. Rather, just take the inspiration that they give. So the strength, though, comes in a group of men, right? A great mountain range, right? So think of how much more difficult it is to get around a huge mountain range, right? Like think of like these old medieval stories of people on a journey, right? And like I think of Lord of the Rings, right? There's a few instances where they're like, man, like we got to go through these mountains, plural, right? And it's a great range, and there's a lot of challenge to it, right? And it's because it's the strength of all these mountains fortify themselves from threat, from being conquered, right? So I think of let me just use a weather example. So where I grew up, I was in the desert of Southern California, and we all know this, that deserts become deserts because of something called the rain shadow effect. And what that means is that a storm comes, rain, it goes a certain direction, it hits a mountain range that is so strong that by the time the storm, if there's anything left after the mountain range, it's so puny that it can't nourish the land behind it, and it becomes a desert, right? There's not a whole lot of vegetation. There's not a whole lot of abundant life, right? So there's a strength in numbers, and likewise, this is a point I'd like to bring up. Any good man who wants to be any man who wants to be good needs to be around other good men, and any good man who wants to be great needs to have a close linking, if you will, with these other men, right? Like it needs to be a mountain range, not sporadic mountains here and there. Hey, see you off in the distance. How's the view over there? You doing well? Good. Doing well over there? Good. No, it needs to be a mountain range, right? And the mountain range, there's a closeness there. And every man needs to be in that sort of mountain range of men. Why? Because they're there to give you strength when you have a challenge, right? They're there to give you help, right? But also they keep you accountable. And men are so prone to pride and to arrogance and to falling for so many reasons and falling in so many ways. You need someone who you respect to call you out. To call you out on your mess ups. And I'll tell you something. It's painful, but hearing someone call you out on something that you messed up on, it sucks. But when you accept it and you go, hey, I respect this man, I love this man, and he just called me out on something, I really need to take that seriously. And I need to figure out how to improve on that. Talk to him about it, right? Hey, I'm really sorry that I did this to you. I'm really sorry that I did this, and make amends, right? How could I have done that better? How could I handle that situation better? How could I make amends in this situation? How can I learn from this, right? Because someone from the outside is going to have a clearer perspective on it than you, right? And so we need men around us to hold us accountable, and it has to be men, because and Shia LaBeouf talks about this in his interview with John Bernthal. He goes to Alcoholics Anonymous, I think it's every day, and it's a men's only group. And he said there's an opportunity to go to a co-ed group, but he chooses to go to a men's only group. He said because there's certain things that we will not, there's certain things that men just will not talk about when women are in the room. But being with men, we can bring up things that men get, and that also women don't need to hear. Women don't need to know about certain things. You don't need to tell women everything. And in fact, if you tell women everything, they won't find that very attractive. So sharing those burdens with men, they know what you're going through. They kind of know how you think, right? And then those men you can take inspiration from and you can learn from, right? And we'll get into that, I believe, here in a moment. But something else I want to touch on. There's a great proverb, Proverbs 27:17. Iron sharpens iron, and one man sharpens another. Right? It's this accountability, it's this strengthening, and the Bible fully recognizes that. In the New Testament, we're called to bear each other's burdens. We can't do this alone. So, let's see here. And another thing that I want to talk about too, in sharing with men is, men all feel inadequate and weak about something, and self-conscious about something. And so when you have a friend, and friends preferably who are close enough, right? You don't want to overshare these things with just any old dude. But when you have men that you trust and you respect, and you can share these vulnerabilities with them, they have the same things, right? We tend to be self-conscious and feel inadequate about very similar things. Maybe the particular details vary, but the idea behind it, the inspiring theme behind it is very similar, and so we can speak to that, right? And that goes back to we need to have men, and there's some things that women just will not understand about the struggles of men. Guys, don't be too prideful. And I can speak to this myself. There's many times where I don't feel like sharing. But the fact is, we all have weaknesses that we deal with, and ways that we feel inadequate. So that brother next to you, he feels the same way about something. Bring it up, and you can share with each other's burdens, and you could share in each other's struggles. Pray for each other, right? Okay. All right, so next stanza. The highest mountain is content. Surrounding mountains give it deference. Stories told of it are ancient. In a journey, it's looked to for reference. I think this metaphor is kind of self-explanatory, but I'd like to elaborate on it. Um, it's easy. If you've ever encountered a great man, he's very content, right? He's content with his life. You can be content and still strive after more, right? I think that is fine, because content and then um, uh, not complicity. I'm trying to figure out the word. Anyways, we'll move on from that. But great men are content with where they're at. And contentment comes from gratitude, right? Being thankful for what you have, and being thankful that it's not completely of your own power that this happened, right? That many of the good things in your life are from God, and the bad things in your life, are they do they suck, or are you able to draw lessons from them and use them to strengthen yourself, right? And you have this contentment. And also, I have this picture going back to the mountain range, where it's kind of interesting to see a lone mountain, right? Like you don't really grasp the height of a lone mountain if you just look at one lone. Like, imagine just a very flat land and then just a lone mountain. You can't really grasp its height, its magnificence, right? Just alone. But when you see a number of mountains around it that are smaller, and you still look at it, you go, wow, those are still some pretty big mountains. And then there's this one that's even higher than those, right? The surrounding mountains illuminate the greatness of this higher mountain. And I think as men, we should take that as a good example, because it's at the end of the day, we are not going to be the highest mountain, not at all, because we are always going to have shortcomings, right? And that said, we should always look to the men who are higher than us, and ultimately the highest man, the God man, the God who became flesh, right, who became man and dwelt among us. Look to him and give absolute deference, right? That deference is respect, honor, reverence, right? Even loyalty, right? Offering those things to that higher man, that man who offers respect. And I think of there's things that go wrong in this, but it still captures the point. You think of these stories of like biker gangs, or literally mobs, right? Like the mob, the mafia, right? The head of a family, or the head of a biker gang, right? You don't just if you were to just interact straight with that guy, you would say, okay, this guy's pretty serious. He's pretty tough, and wow, this guy's a force. But then when you see the surrounding men under him, who are also tough and a little scary sometimes, give honor, respect, and deference to that man, it only illuminates that man's status. And I don't think there's anything wrong in aiming for that. We always have to have humility, though, and it should never be a competition. It should always be earned and respected, and that's why like the organizations that have these hierarchies, right, where a man's at the top, the man who just outcompetes everyone, right, out of blood, he's not. If he makes it to the top, he's not going to last very long, and that's something that Jordan Peterson, now second time I've mentioned him, he talks about his education on all the literature on chimps, and he said it's actually not the strongest, most powerful chimp that stays at the hierarchy of the community of chimps, right? The most successful head of the chimp community is the one who cares for the ones who are below it and who have treated them well on his way up, right? And who's not afraid and willing to care for those who are below him. But the chimp who, competes for blood and goes after everyone aggressively to get to the top, he might get to the top, but the community is going to turn it into a tyranny, and then ultimately somebody's going to usurp him. They're going to overthrow that chimp, right? And I think the same thing could be said for men. So and that's a great lesson. If you're not willing to be, if you want to be a man of that high status, and have that honor and respect given to you, you need to be willing to stoop down to the lowest level and care for everyone down there and everyone in between. That's how it is. And you need to be humble that you take your position of status with gratitude, right? And use that status to help everyone below you, and that lifts everyone else up. Let's see, anything else? Yeah, okay, sorry. There's more to be said. Stories told of it are ancient, right? And this is right. We don't necessarily have to look at great men of history, right? But those are great examples, right? The greatest men of history. Right, we have stories going back of these great men in history and hundreds, even thousands of years old. But think of just people who you probably grew up around, right? Like the elderly dudes who were really good men, or men who maybe have passed on. The really good men, the men who live good lives, stories are told of them long after they're gone, even if it's just in the small town that they grew up, lived, and died in, right? I think of that. What is it? Is it a Kane Brown song or something? I love it. I'm not a big Kane Brown guy. Apologies if it's not him, but he has a song like "I Know Famous People You've Never Even Heard of." Like it's that idea, right? You don't need to be some famous historical figure, but good men, right? Stories will be told of these good men, and so another good thing is. Right, a good man is looked to for reference in a journey, right? If you are instituting good masculinity, all the themes that I've touched on in the previous stanzas, then you're going to build a lot of competence and wisdom, and that wisdom is going to be able to be shared, right? And people who are on a path that you used to be on, or dealing with things you used to deal with things you currently deal with, right? They'll look to you as a source of reference. And similarly, mountains are always great landmarks for maps, right? Especially older maps, before GPS. Mountains were always really good reference points in a journey. And likewise, a really great man is a great reference point in life's journey. All right. Let's see. And actually, I want to. There's one more thing I want to say about this, this contentment. Again, going back to this idea of calmness in the storm, that stability. How do you think that a man gets that? And I'm going to tell you how I've gotten some of it. I don't know how much I got. I have a lot of room to grow, but how I've gotten some of it, gotten a taste of it, is becoming a Christian, straight up. Because what do you have to lean on if life goes completely awry? Right? Where are you going to find any peace? How are you going to be able to combat the storms that come after you if you have nothing left? But what does Christianity tell you? Christianity tells you, and this is true. I believe it to be true. I believe it to be the truth. God loves you. God loves you no matter what. He loves you so much that he sent his only son to die for you. He saw the world, and he came up with the world to create, and he saw the possibility of you being in it, and he said, I want that world. That's how special you are to him. And you're so special that for how many mess ups you have, and how wretched you are, he still loves you, and he loves you so much in spite of all those things that he took on the way to save you. And if you trust in him, if you follow him, you submit, you give deference to that mountain, and we'll get to Jesus being the ultimate mountain in a minute, you have heaven secured, right? You have heaven secured. This is not something we need to guess at or we need to be scared about. If you follow Jesus, you have heaven secured. If you've repented and you submit to Jesus, you have heaven secured. Why does this give peace? It gives peace because God, when we submit to God's will, we are submitting to the best things for us. God loves us. He is love, and it's not this pantheistic, oh, God is love and love is God. No, it's not that. God is a person, right? But God's ultimate being is love, and he created you, and he knows what's best for you. He knows the best, not what's better, but the best. And when you submit to his will, you are submitting to the best for yourself. You are submitting to the design that he has for your life. And he wants, and loving you, he wills the good of you, the best for you. And so when things happen in your life that you don't know how to deal with, that are challenging, it is because God has allowed it to happen or designed it to happen. And there's really an overlap in between those two things. Those are really saying the same thing. God wants this happening to you because it's going to make you better. Now, if you take it into your own control, now, I do this all the time. Every single person does this because we're sinners, because we're selfish, and we want things to be in our control because we're scared. But if you let go and trust in God, you will be better off, and you can go through that storm with stability. I don't know what's going on with this craziness in life, and I'm at the bottom of the tank. I'm at rock bottom. I don't know where to go. But for some reason, God let this happen for me. I'm excited to see why, right? Let that be your peace. That is the source of peace right there. And you know what? If God gives you too much and you can't handle it, and worse comes to worse, you die from it, you submitted to God's will, you have heaven secured. What can bring more peace than that? If there's something out there, I'm all ears. But I haven't heard anything that brings more peace than that. So be humble and recognize the sin that you have done to others, but ultimately to God. And recognize that God, he says, I took care of that for you. Just trust in my act of salvation. Trust in me and follow me. As Jesus says to everyone who approaches him, follow me. After he heals him, follow me, right? Okay. So that brings us to the last stanza. Mountains are where heaven and earth meet, and the path to the Creator is made. While the glory of God shines on the greatest peaks, here the cosmic drama is displayed. This stanza is not necessarily directed towards man. It's more, I'm getting more directed to the man, the God-man, right? As our Eastern Orthodox brothers would call our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ. They call him the God-man, right? He is fully God and fully human. How that works, we don't know. It's a mystery. It's supernatural. We're not necessarily, there's great theology and figuring that out, and great theologians have discussed it, and I think they add a lot of clarity to it. But at the end of the day, it is a mystery. But history tells us, the Bible tells us, God became flesh in the form of Jesus Christ. And it's always interesting because whenever a mountain is mentioned in the Bible, experienced readers, their ears perk up because we know God's about to do something important. Start in Genesis. People don't realize this, but it's mentioned I believe in Ezekiel, that the Garden of Eden was a mountain, right? It's where heaven and earth meet, both literally visually, right? The skies, the heavens above, and earth meet. But symbolically too, it's a symbol. And so you have the Garden of Eden on the mountain, Mount Sinai, right, where Moses receives the commandments, right? That's where, and then all the way to I'm blanking on this. Don't tell me. The transfiguration, right? Jesus, his full glory is displayed to Peter, James, and John, right? And it's on a mountain. The crucifixion was on a mountain. The fact is that the most important things that God does, they're on a mountain. And in fact, Jesus, he takes on the most important parts in his ministry are on a mountain, right? Even, right, the Sermon on the Mount, right? They're on a mountain. Very special things happen on a mountain. And so we take this metaphor of the mountain. Man is a mountain, and the ultimate mountain is Christ, right? All of and as men, we're very lucky, very blessed to have Jesus, God, come in the flesh, and he is a man, right? So we could look to him as a great example, and it's through this mountain we are down on earth, and we look to the mountain that is Jesus, the ultimate man, who lived the perfect life. We look to him, and he is the path, right? John 14:6. He is the way, the truth, and the life. No one goes to the Father except through him. He is the path to the Creator. And so, likewise, when we emulate Christ and we submit to him, he, by his grace, infuses us with virtue and allows us to live holy lives and help those around us and bring others closer to God. And this is the glory. This act, that act I just described, is the glory of God on the peaks, and the greatest peaks show the glory of God. And it's just a simple picture, right? It's like you get to the top of a very high mountain, and you're like, wow, this is magnificent. There's beauty, there's splendor, and it's the glory of God. And this is the ultimate story of God. The most important parts are told, or there's a mountain on it, and it's here that the story of Christianity happens, where man is a mountain. If man is a mountain, that metaphor goes, right? The cosmic drama is displayed here. So that's my poem, Man is a Mountain. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you like my commentary on it. That's certainly my meaning. But of course, I think if it's a good metaphor and if it's a good poem, there's much more to be said there. Probably a lot that I haven't even thought about, again, if it is good. So I really want to hear what you think. If you have other interpretations, takeaways, lessons learned from my poem, I definitely want to hear it. I do. So check out, or leave a comment, leave a like, subscribe, and then definitely check out my Substack and my Instagram, where I will be posting more poems. I don't think I'll do a podcast on every single poem, but I've been wanting to speak on masculinity, so happy to share this one. And check out my Substack. Check out those interviews with Shia LaBeouf, and check me out on Instagram as well, tmock_56. And thank you so much for listening. Men, go be a mountain. I will catch you in the next one. All right. Bye-bye.